26 of the podcast. Today I'm joined by Rhea Cartwright and we're talking about the topic of social injustice within the fashion industry. Rhea and I met last year for a one-to-one session, making a plan on how she was going to leave her 9 to 5, and fast forward a year and she's writing for publications such as Refinery 29 and Dazed. How inspiring is that? Rhea was so kind to make herself available at short notice to discuss the topic in detail, and she shares her views on how the fashion industry has reacted to the death of George Floyd and the topic of racism, which has been an issue in the industry for years. It took me circa 4 seconds to know who I wanted to discuss these topics with, and I just knew it had to be Rhea because this weekend, in the episode we talk about how Rhea called out some online publications to address the current situation, which brands have done well and who's missed the mark entirely. I actually think reading that it's a bit of an understatement. Why it's no longer acceptable for brands to remain neutral at times like this, the difference between tokenism and authentic action, and the advice for brands going forward on how they can contribute to change.
Okay, so I am Rhea Cartwright and I am a beauty strategy consultant and have segued into beauty journalism. So I've been in the industry since I was 21 and have pretty much worked on every single arm of the industry. From, and I started out in my final year at uni on the shop floor at Space NK. Then I moved on to working for brands on their sales and training teams. And then, what did I do after that? Then I started consulting actually. I actually then did start consulting, but really, really small. And I was really just helping with other people that had humongous consulting businesses. And then I went into beauty services. So I did a facialist course because I'm pretty OCD, I need to know everything. I always want to know everything about the industry. And then it was last year, then I made I pivoted into writing, which I'd never ever thought about, but has actually been such a great place for me to, to really have kind of influence and kind of gain a revolution, which is kind of what I want,
Yes. Well, I knew that I wanted to talk about racism and social injustice within the fashion industry, and it took me about 4 seconds to realise that I wanted to do it with you. I was sat here, I was like, I can't just sit in my bedroom and reel off stuff on my own. I was like, Rhea's my woman, let's go. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of a way of where to start, to be honest, but I think let's think about what you have been doing this weekend and actually calling people out of what they've been doing. Because I think neutrality has been the easy route for fashion brands for a long time and fashion publications, beauty publications. But I mean, it's just not an option anymore.
No, absolutely not. I think, to be, you can't possibly be apolitical. And I think even if you believe you are apolitical, by default of you living in in our country, a democratic society, being allowed to vote, whether you vote or not, you are political even if you choose not to be, just by default of, what you're wearing or the decisions that you make every single day. So for me, my thing was, rather than tackle brands whose essentially a brand's obligation is to produce items, a publication's job is to publish. And I just feel that, the British lifestyle media, that covers, fashion, beauty, wellness, etc., was failing us as Black people. And I think, we know that, when you see, their corporate boards and their senior management, the absolute lack of diversity there.
Yeah.
So I just was my whole issue with it specifically was, you have your, Naomi, Oprah, Michelle Obama, Naomi Anderson, Jordan Dunn, Meghan Markle, all of these Black faces on your front covers, with makeup by Pat McGrath, you know, the only black female billionaire in the beauty space, with cornrows, braids, or afros when it suits you, but yet there is now a deafening silence. And that just doesn't sit right, because essentially you can't exploit black culture and really the black aesthetic when you want to sell a magazine or you want to solicit likes, but then actually when it comes down to truly supporting those lives, it's, you know, absolute tumbleweed.
So what happened?
So what did happen? Well, it was about three days of kind of a relentless approach on my behalf, you know, relentlessly but still polite.
Yeah, you were polite.
You know, it's just facts. You know, it's just, all one has to do really is look at their social media accounts and see what they're doing. And they weren't doing anything. And you know, it was kind of almost like it was business as usual. And naturally, I understand that, you know, it's in, you know, their social team or their digital editors would have had, you know, pre-written content, whether it was actually on the sites themselves or, you know, pre-scheduled posts to go up. But I kind of feel that when you work in digital, you have an obligation to be responsive. And we know anyway that, you know, there are editors that do cover the weekend, because lots of key events and activity can happen across the weekend, of which they have to respond to because their competitors will be. So thankfully, you know, there started to become progress, and all of the publications now consequently have uploaded and have acknowledged and have guided their readers, which had collectively had 6 million followers alone just on their Instagram, and guided them towards educational resources. And then I was then told by 2 of them that it was because of me. Obviously, this is, you know, I'm not obviously going to say who told me, but they said, you know, I saw your post, I sent it to our head of digital, then had a conversation on the phone, and it's because of me seeing it that it then went up. And it's kind of like, interesting. I mean, you know, it is, you know, I think unfortunately for me, my privilege in that was that because I'm freelance and I'm not directly linked to a publication, I could do that. You know, I'm sure that there are lots of other journalists that work in-house that have my same sentiments, but they are not allowed to obviously speak as freely. But, you know, thank goodness I am. So I
The joys of being freelance.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, you know, what it's done more than anything is it's really opened up, I think, for those people, and they are predominantly non-Black, for the people that work in those publications, and in some of them of which are institutions. You know, think of Condé Nast and Hearst. They are institutions, whereas someone like Sheer Lux is obviously independent. But I don't think, hopefully we won't discuss those people today, not right now. Is that they're white. There is a significant lack of diversity there, and conversations need to be had. So it's not just, okay, well, we'll have a Black person on the front cover. It's, you know, what are your hiring policies? What does your senior management look like? And overwhelmingly, it's white. So things have to change for there to be change.
Yeah, and I think when those people are employed in positions of power, that's when the longevity gets introduced. So yes, a Black model is on the front cover for 1 month. Or like one collection, and then we'll move on, and that's fine. And, you know, everyone's posting their Black squares, and great, and then they'll move on. But it's like when those people are in the structure of the workforce, it won't be allowed to just move on. Like, that is the point.
No, having said that, you have to have more than one Black person in there. Because I think, I know what will happen is that off the back of all of this stuff that's been happening recently, they'll be like, oh, you know, we're going to have to make sure that, you know, our team is more inclusive. but actually quite often there is nothing scarier and nothing more oppressive than being the only Black person in a publication. Because a lot of the time, in a way that I know we're going to discuss it later in terms of the tokenism that we've seen, you know, from the public outpouring of donations from brands, but sometimes when you're the only Black person in an office, that is still just tokenism. You're just there to tick a box.
Yeah.
And that can be just as damaging. You kind of have to have all the different checkpoints. You've got to have diversity, not just at the top, because that often doesn't do anything either.
Yeah, I guess as well, when we were speaking earlier, one of the issues that's coming up is that people are talking about Black people as one voice, and there's lots of different voices. So going back to your point, rather than just having one person in there, that's quite a lot of pressure as well, I guess, to be like, you're Black, what do you think? What do you think the collective think? And it's like, I can't speak for all people. So yeah, I think it is about having a mix. And I quite like the idea that some brands have done where they hire like a board of people to, you know, collectively discuss and have conversations with and hear lots of different points of view before they kind of do anything. So that could be another option as well, especially for small businesses as well. Like, we'll probably get onto it about what they can do. But yeah, I think having conversations with a variety of people.
This is the thing, you know, and I think, and I spoke about this, I think last year as well. I mean, obviously, you know, we are speaking, and the narrative of the last kind of, you know, week or so has been very much, you know, Black and the representation of Black people in, you know, in the world. But obviously we're speaking about, you know, fashion, beauty, creative industry. But it goes deeper than just someone's skin tone. It's also, you know, the socioeconomic reasons behind it. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's equally as important. So if, like you said, you know, the pressure, if you are the only Black person in the office, in a position of leadership, that you are then the kind of the reference for every single Black person. I mean, it's kind of like saying, you know, it's kind of like, oh, well, let's use Hitler as the kind of spokesperson for white people. You know, it just wouldn't even you can't, it's not even comprehensible that would happen, because you'd be like, oh, maybe he's not the voice we should listen to, you know?
Like, yeah, exactly.
But when it's reversed, it's like, oh no, it's fine because we've got so and so in person, so we must have it covered. It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, and going back to the socio-economic part of it as well, I was listening to a podcast recently where they were talking about, to get into fashion or beauty or press, the way to get into it is work experience.
Exactly.
And I mean, the laws are changing around how much you can get paid, and you can't work for free, but I'm sure there's still lots of people doing it and, you know, tweaking the system. But how do you feel about what brands can do to introduce like young talent in diversity? I mean, obviously paying them is one thing.
I mean, they have to, it's all going to start with money. What I find always very interesting is that, you know, when you hear, for example, like fashion designers, and they, or actually, it doesn't have to be just fashion, or often, you know, people that, fashion and beauty, and they are from like obscure towns in the middle of nowhere. You know, they grew up with no money at all. And they say, oh, they always say, you know, my one like piece of, like, essentially, I guess it would have been self-care if we speak about it today, but their one like shining light was that when they worked in the hairdressers when they were 13, there would be, you know, a Tatler or a Harper's Bazaar, and they would always, you know, they'd take that home with them. I remember hearing like Grace Coddington, like that, you know, that was her escapism, would be a fashion magazine. She is not someone, and there are so many other examples, they're not from the backgrounds that their magazines now represent. But a magazine is a dream, it's an aspiration, you know, like it's a fantasy. Yeah. So I think to then assume that it's only people that can afford, you know, a £4,000 dress that should work there is just ridiculous. And unless the entry point into the creative industry is changed, then it's always going to be the same people there.
Yeah.
So, and again, of course, you know, from a geographical perspective, you know, all of the head offices are in London. So essentially then if you're not in a very privileged position to live somewhat close to London, and let's say you're living with parents, then you'll say your parents live there, you know, you absolutely cannot move to London, work unpaid for an internship for potentially, you know, 2 or 3 years, pay rent, pay travel. You can't do it. And there is one thing that irritates me to no end. There are so many journalists that are, or ex-journalists that, you know, got to director level, so whether beauty director, fashion director. I can think of one in particular in beauty, and she always talks about how, you know, she started off at the absolute lowest of the low level and worked her way up, and, you know, she wasn't given, she you know, she had no money, but her family were rich. You know, your mother has a Birkin. So with all respect, there's a big difference between you coming here, your parents not giving you money, but them actually having a significant amount of wealth, versus someone that doesn't have that security blanket. And actually for her to say that, you know, I just came here from nothing and I just worked relentlessly to get to where I am, it is, it's disingenuous. Because compare that now, you know, compare someone whose mother has Birkins, and it's not to say that, you know, great, I'm glad she has that, I'm sure that her family worked hard for that, but someone whose mother has Birkins in their wardrobe is not the same as somebody from, you know, a potentially impoverished background, but actually has the like intelligent aptitude for greatness, but just can't possibly break that barrier down because they cannot afford to not work.
Yeah.
They're not comparable.
Yeah, because they're not given the opportunity to work as hard as the working people. They are no. Yeah. And so moving into brands, I pulled off some stats, and for any brands that do think it's not my place to say, we've never had to say anything before, 9 out of 10 Gen Z consumers believe companies have a responsibility to address environmental and social issues, and 2/3 of consumers worldwide say they would switch, avoid, or boycott brands based on their stance on controversial issues. So I found a good quote. It said, fashion brands must care because their customers care. And that is your answer as to why you should say something. And I think during times like this, people really, really remember how you react in situations when it comes to, you know, worldwide pandemics or
exactly
riots, and what are you going to do about it? So I thought it might be, well, is there anything you've got to say about how brands stay silent? And maybe we can dig into the ones that are as of today.
As in how brands stay silent?
Or what your thoughts are around brands who stay silent?
I mean, essentially, you know, and I guess this is a conversation that you and I probably both have with our like respective clients, is that a brand has to have brand values.
Yeah.
So, you know, whether your brand values are centered around, you know, the quality of your goods or, you know, your customer service, whatever, they naturally have to expand beyond that into ways that are relatable then for your consumer. We expect that from new brands. We expect that new up and coming brands have very, very, you know, strict pillars that extend to, as you said, sustainability or, you know, human rights or, you know, and all of those things that are so prevalent right now. But yeah, I think sometimes those same values, well, because they haven't been respected by the heritage brands, they quite often get away with it. And I think now what we're seeing is, no, you can't get away with it anymore. And I think one of the main reasons that they can't is that their consumer is diverse. So whereas, I don't know, when Louis Vuitton first started in maybe 18th, 19th century, you know, their consumer would have been an affluent individual. So 2020 now, your consumer is very different. Your consumer is from a broad spectrum of backgrounds that therefore have to reflect, and obviously you can't reflect every single person's, you know, values and political stances, but there has to be a this is right and this is wrong at the very minimum. So to tend to say nothing, to stay silent, I mean, number one, I think it's embarrassing. Above all, it's absolutely embarrassing for, you know, whoever's decision that is, whether it's like the communications director, to stay silent on matters that affect all humans. And this is the thing with what's coming out of, you know, the recent narrative, is that whether you are black or not black, this system, this oppressive system, affects everybody. So a brand has to speak about that, and to stay silent. I mean, it's hugely damaging, because, like you said, people will remember. You know, people will remember how you acted in this amalgamative mess of global health pandemic and racial injustice explosion. People will remember this
definitely
forever. Like, you know, you can imagine in you know, 5-10 years, when people are studying, you know, either fashion marketing, or they're doing like fashion MBAs, or, well, not even fashion, across all businesses, this 2020 will be a look at the examples, look at what people did and look at what people didn't do.
Yeah. Which camp would you rather sit in?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's been happening for about a week now since George Floyd was murdered. And so I think that is a sufficient amount of time to come up with a response, in my opinion. And as of today, on the 3rd of June, brands who have done absolutely nothing are Topshop, Marks and Spencer's, Next, John Lewis, Miss Selfridge. I mean, there's an Arcadia theme happening here, but we won't go into that. I saw a quote online that I liked that just said, humanity is always on brand. And going back to your brand values, you know, if you don't stand for humanity, then what do you stand for? I don't know. And then there's been some brands that have spoken out, but have got it so wrong. And I thought about maybe speaking about L'Oreal to begin with, because I think that is just scary.
I mean, the issue with L'Oreal is so tremendously huge that I don't even know really where to start. I mean, obviously, so for any listeners that aren't aware, they had Monroe, who was one of their brand ambassadors, who is a black trans woman. And she publicly spoke out about white supremacy and was therefore dropped by L'Oreal for that. And then she came under a barrage of abuse. I mean, I don't know if anybody has seen it, and I can't remember, because it was in 2017. Some of the stuff that was said about her, how she's still here, is already a testament to her own strength. Because, you know, trolls of the internet are just, you know, just the absolute barrel, you know, they're from the gutter anyway. And, you know, she's very public about her beliefs and her own brand values. So the absolute hypocrisy now to see L'Oreal essentially capitalizing on the oppression of black people, when you're their own ambassador, you know, you dropped your own ambassador for doing the exact same thing. Honestly, it leaves me actually dumbfounded, because all it does is it cements the fact that for the majority of brands, they don't care. This is now a moment to get all their PR and marketing ducks in a row and portray a belief that they fundamentally do not have. If L'Oreal or any of their executives actually believe this message, then Monroe wouldn't have been dropped. And I think this kind of the bigger question about it is, you know, as you mentioned, the statistic about people that would boycott a brand if they didn't adhere to the same values as them, is that you know, L'Oreal is another institution. They own so many brands that to avoid them, to actively avoid them, I mean, nothing in life is impossible, but it would be incredibly, incredibly challenging. And then you know, you have to really think, why did you not just be honest? Why would you not say, you know what, actually, we really messed up in 2017? Because we're all human, you know? I think, you know, obviously I'm speaking about institutions and brands, but behind all of those are people, are real people like you and I, and we make mistakes. And I think there's nothing better, there's nothing more human than saying, I messed up. I messed up, we messed up. We absolutely know we made probably the worst decision in our careers, and we want to make up for it. And we're gonna actively make up for it, but by not just apologizing to Monroe or giving some money, we are going to put in place a strict set of structures that are going to ensure that this never, ever, ever happens again. But they've not done that.
What they have done is posted "Speaking Out is Worth It" and a Blackout Tuesday post and both posts have like tens of thousands of comments on. And not one of them, I mean, not that I can see from a glance, has had a reply to it. No. And it's just like brand suicide. I can't imagine why they wouldn't apologize.
I mean, they undoubtedly now,
or say something like especially that one post that said "Speaking Out is worth it" and had all the comments, but then to post again the next day still with nothing, and I'm just like, it makes you feel sick.
I mean, they are in the middle of a crisis now, you know. I even to be on their communications team, or to be honest, any member of their senior management, and the conversations, you know, the Zoom calls and the email threads that they're having right now, I dread to think what is happening. Because whilst I still, I mean, ultimately believe that anything they do further will just be to protect their own, you know, share price, that for them is going to be hugely important. You know, that how much this knock-on effect will affect their, you know, their bottom line. So I just think, I kind of think, L'Oreal, you know, what are you going to do to get out of this?
Yeah.
How are you going to rectify this? Because it's so deeply ingrained. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that it's not just, you know, they didn't just do a post, or they didn't just do a donation. It's almost this kind of like, it's the thread, the undercurrent of nearly every single brand, especially, you know, your global billion-dollar brands. All of these topics, you know, lack of diversity, the oppression of Black people in the workplace, the fact that the senior management teams and the executives and the people on the board all look the same. That's where the change has to start. So I just can't believe, to say that speaking out is worth it, but when someone did speak out, you got rid of them.
For speaking out.
Yeah, for doing that exact same thing. For me, you know, Monroe needs compensation. She needs compensation, and like whatever her contract was when she was an ambassador, it would need to be, you know, triple, quadruple, I mean huge, because you're not only speaking about her potential loss of earnings with L'Oreal, but also you know, the knock-on effect for herself as an individual, and also loss of earnings she could have potentially had elsewhere. It's unfathomable how they have treated her. And then, of course, they then need to look internally. And then, of course, at some point, they are going to have to release some kind of public statement, admitting, you know, wrongdoing. And I think how they approach that is going to be very telling of everything else. And frankly, if they don't release a statement, it's going to be a very scary time, I think, for the industry. And also, I worry about all of the brands that they've kind of bought, but they've acquired, that before obviously had, you know, individual founder. or maybe that founder is still technically under contract, but, you know, is just now owned by them. I feel for those people, you know, because it's kind of like there will be a lot of people that work under L'Oreal that fully support Monroe.
Yeah.
That every cell in their body will agree with what she's done at the time and now. And yet, because of the greater powers that be are kind of blocking that, their voices and their opinions aren't heard. And that's debilitatingly frustrating when you work for an organization that doesn't support, like you said, humanity, when you know that is the right thing to do, is devastating.
Yeah. Well, that was my question. How can L'Oreal come back from this? I mean, we'll just have to wait and see.
Honestly, I don't think
An apology is a start, but it's
yeah,
definitely not the end.
I don't think they can.
No.
And I don't think they care as well, because they own, you know, one of, if not the largest beauty conglomerate in the world. So quite frankly, people are still going to buy their products regardless. And even if they just stop in the UK, or, you know, just Monroe's followers and supporters stop, it doesn't change anything for them. That's the frightening truth of the business. You know, once I mean, obviously they're not a monopoly, but once you have really taken a humongous market share of a humongous market, you know, if a few 100,000 people don't buy a product, big deal, you know, from their perspective, obviously.
Yeah.
So, do they care enough to do the correct damage control? I don't think they do.
And on the flip side, then Glossier, who are just, I mean, they can't put a foot wrong at the moment. I think they're doing such a good job, and I can read out their statement here that I've got. Says, we stand in solidarity with the fight against systematic racism, white supremacy, and the historic oppression of the Black community. We will be donating $500,000 focused on combating racial injustice, and listed out the charities, so Black Lives Matter, the NAACP, Legal Defensive and Educational Fund, the Equal Justice Initiative, the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, and We Protesters. And in an effort to make an impact within our own industry, we will be allocating an additional $500,000 in the form of grants to Black-owned beauty businesses, and more details to come. And that is that's not even comparable to L'Oreal. Let's leave that and let's put a pin in that and come back to it another day. But then they're donating, but then they're also taking action. And I really like what they've said is like, more details to come. We just want to let you know that this is our intention and we're working towards this. And I think that's so honest, that we're not perfect, we've not got there, this is our intention, stay tuned, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember when they released that. I mean, I'm like nocturnal basically. So when they released that, I was still awake. So I mean, I'm not saying that I was probably the first person in the UK to see it, but I know I would have been a very early person on our time zone to have seen it. And my response to it, because I shared it on my story immediately, and I was like, Glossier are consistently setting the bar incredibly high. And I think, obviously they are new, and therefore they can be very agile and responsive. But I just think, Emily is a true leader. If she's an inspiration anyway, in terms of what she's achieved, as a female business owner. And I just think the way in which they operate at every level, and particularly with this now public outpouring, is phenomenal, because it's a really sustainable plan. First of all, the actual sum of money to the charities is one of the largest donations that we've seen. There are brands that have, obviously you don't obviously know how much capital a brand has, but there are brands that one would imagine have similar, but have not donated nearly as much in terms of the charities. But then it's actually we're going one step further, and we are using the exact same amount to actually help people in our own industry. And I think the fact that they're helping with other black businesses, black beauty businesses is the key there, because number one, it shows that they're so confident in their own brand's ability. They're actually to help and uplift others, won't damage them. You know, they are so they're so focused on truly giving back that they are happy to support others in that same space. It's so important because, you know, my thing is always, how many people are you bringing up with you, you know? And the greater, the best thing about investing into black businesses is, number one, obviously there is an absolute history of you know, the statistics surrounding black owned businesses in America and the approval of loans to black businesses. I mean, they're so shockingly depressing. But you have to really think that Glossier and Emily could potentially be giving money to the next Glossier, you know, or the next Estee Lauder, or the next L'Oreal. When you donate to a business and you help someone's business, it's got such a compoundingly exponential effect that it really changes people's lives.
Yeah.
And I love that they've done that. You know, as I said, we also know, because obviously they've mentioned, but you know, knowing their culture and how much, you know, their community management and how much they really nurture their community, you know, this won't be the end. You know, I know they've said it, but you know that there will be absolutely more to come. And I think, I don't know, the way that they conduct their business is just so admirable. And I think they are, you know, truly innovating the beauty space in so many ways. And I just hope, and I know that they will anyway, continue to do so. It's particularly, you know, if they stay independent, which I really hope they do.
Yeah, I think because they really do have conversations with their audience. And I know this is slightly off topic, but when they came up with that cleanser and they said, what should we call it? And somebody was like, well, it's kind of milky and it's kind of like jelly, so why don't you call it the Milky Jelly Cleanser? And they were like, cool. And they have these conversations back and forth with their audience. And that is something brands are so terrified to do, is they go, what should we do? Ask them. Ask them what they think you would be comfortable.
That's the thing, you know, I always
doing, and then I'm
so shocked, right, when people are like, or even when people, you know, when people are trying to, like, you know, grow their brand or on their social channel, for example, and they're like, I don't know what to post. I'm like,
yeah,
the people that are already there, like, you know, not everything has to be, you know, a conference meeting where you get all your execs. Like, it's like people are really scared to just do sometimes the absolute simplest thing, but you know, it's those simple conversations that create the biggest change. And you know, community management and curating and nurturing the community that you have as a brand is the most paramount thing you can do now and forever. And that, I think, is what will give us the heritage brands of the futures. You know, the heritage brands that we have now, or what we would call heritage. So, you know, maybe like your Clarins and, you know, anything that's come from like a fashion house. Really their heritage because there was no choice at the time, you know? I mean, significantly less choice. Of course, you had, you know, lots of the brands that existed, but they don't exist anymore, or there's so much choice now. There are so many options for which to go down as a consumer that it really will only be the ones that are willing to have open, honest, refreshing conversations with their customers that will prevail. And until you do that, you're not going to have the success that you want or you think you deserve. It's not going to happen.
No. I mean, for anyone that can't see me, I'm literally like nodding like the Churchill dog here. Yes. And I want to shout out one of the brands that I do work with, who are Lucy and Yak, and they are not releasing any new products a week. They're sharing resources, they're sharing educational content, and they are working on an action plan for going forward. But going back to that honesty and community, they're so honest. They'll always jump on what they're not doing right before anyone can call them out on it. And that is so brave, I think, to just say, yeah, like sometimes this doesn't fit right, or sometimes, but you know, we know we're working on it. And actually somebody had put on their post like, oh, it was a bit slow from you guys to post something. And they said, yeah, we know, we're really sorry about that. But we wanted to collect all the resources. I hope you accept our apology and that you gain some useful information from what we've shared. And I was like, oh my God, that's the first person I've seen is going, yeah, you're right, actually, we were a bit slow, totally hands up. Like, yeah, you're right. And I like that. I think it's great.
Because we, you know, I mean, first of all, your consumer deserves transparency, right? Like your consumer deserves honesty. And on the flip side of that, again, if you think of it if it were your friend rather than a business, you appreciate when your friends are honest with you.
Yeah.
So
does my bum look big in this? Yes or no?
I just think, you know, it is refreshing. As I said, when we spoke about, you know, the humongous companies, there are people behind those. We all make mistakes at times. Nobody is perfect. So there is this refreshing honesty when brands are like, you know what? Yeah, we hadn't thought about, you know, diversity and inclusion. We hadn't thought about the ways in which we can use Black influencers and Black creatives. We just hadn't thought about it. And we hadn't thought about it because potentially of our own privileges, that again, because we aren't oppressed by the system, we weren't aware of. And now, because of these conversations, it is at the forefront of our minds, and we will continue to uphold certain standards moving forward. That's all ultimately you can ask.
Yeah.
And I guess it all comes down to the fact that, you know, you have to be made aware. You have to acknowledge a situation, anything in life, before you can act on it.
Yeah.
So step one is acknowledgement, right? And and that, I think, you know, for a lot of people, for a lot of white people, the acknowledgement is a very hard pill to swallow, because they are almost taken aback. You know, you're seeing people, friends of mine, that are almost shocked because they were like, I had no idea. I don't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. And again, these people, like all people, then work for companies. So there's a little bit of a, ooh, and I think that, you know, Black people have to not accept that, because really you shouldn't have to, you know, we shouldn't have to still be fighting for these things. I shouldn't have to make it crystal clear for you to understand the oppression of Black people and the systemic injustice that traps people, whether it's in the education system or the professional system or anywhere else. But if you didn't know that, then the first step is, I tell you that, and then you can move forward, you know. So, you know, hats off to Lucy and Yak, because it's hard. It's very hard to say, yeah, you're completely right, and we're gonna work our butts off to do better. If they don't do better, okay, then our conversations have to be had. But you have to give people a chance to do better, because that's life.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really important. And just touching on some other brands, like New Look have posted the black square, but then there's a lot of comments on their page about the fact their feed is 99% white and definitely needs some work there. And then we were just having a look at this post who at What Eva Wears, that's a mouthful, has put on her Instagram about In the Style, and they promoted or have made an anti-racism charity t-shirt and said all of the profits will go to the George Floyd Memorial Fund. But what Eva is saying is like, it's a waste of resources, waste of material produced potentially through exploitative labor, and just cut out the middleman and donate the money. Like this t-shirt, you've done it. You're going to be driving traffic to your website at the end of the day, aren't you? And yes, you might buy that t-shirt, but you might also potentially buy another t-shirt, which will be of benefit to you.
But the other thing, so it's important to add that actually, even if they don't buy, isn't it? When you drive traffic to a website, even if you don't buy, anybody that, you know, works in, you know, digital marketing will know that they will have a Facebook pixel on their website. So whether or not the customer actually buys, you've then been tracked by them. So they then have data on you from the cookies, which you will then now start to get in the style adverts that are targeted directly at you because they have seen that you've been on there. So it's not even just, oh, well, you potentially might buy. Whether you buy or not, you're now going to get targeted by them.
Yeah, that's really true. And the fact that, similar to New Look, that I mean, their whole business is based around collaborating with influencers, and they're all white. Like, surprise, surprise. So that's not great. H&M have donated £500,000. They've had a bit of backlash about the fact it's not enough, but I think it's quite brave to actually put a number on it, and their stores have been closed for 3 months. It's a very tough climate. I don't know. Maybe it's not enough, and maybe there definitely needs to be more action taken in that group. So we'll see.
I think very important as well is that it's not just, you know, to chuck money at something doesn't actually mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, it's
not really about the number. It's about.
No, I mean, yeah. I commend the brands that are stating the figure, because what I am quite disgusted at is people saying, "Oh, we're going to donate," and it's the wording, you see. It's that subtle nuance between all profits, or we're going to donate 25% of sales.
Yeah.
You know, what does that mean? What does that equate to? Because actually, your profits are going to vary depending on where people are buying from. If they're buying, you know, direct from your website, you're obviously going to have large profits. If they're buying from a third-party retailer, they're going to be significantly less. So actually, what does that number even equate to? And more importantly than that is, again, it's so displaced. Oh, we're going to put money on something and that's it. And not actually even maybe think about and follow through with what happens with that money. Because to give $500,000 is a big sum. Like, if you were to give a comparative amount as an individual to an organization, you would actually really want to know, where is that money? What's happening with that money?
Yeah.
And it's not sustainable, which is why, you know, the Glossier approach of not only giving to charity, so there's like almost like a rapid response, but also to give to businesses so they can cultivate their own success. Or a very good example actually is Caroline Hirons, who was like a, you know, I'm sure everyone knows, big beauty guru. She has a relationship with Pixie Beauty, and the profits from, she has a cleanser, the profits from her cleanser for the year will be going to charity. And they are also looking at other, you know, more sustainable things, rather than just dropping off a big lump sum and then doing nothing.
Never talking about it again. Yeah.
It doesn't kind of make sense. It's like putting a plaster on open heart surgery. You know, it will very slightly, you know, create some comfort, but long term does nothing.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that even I've personally learned throughout this week, is that sustainability element and the intention there. And I was looking at something actually, which is slightly better news, that spring summer 2020, the last fashion season, was the most racially diverse on the catwalk. So New York Fashion Week had 47% of all models were of colour. But then
that was in
great.
New York.
In New York, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then also further down, when you're reading it, Naomi Campbell said, great, but now what's happening inside your offices? And I think you posted that thing that was like, great, you've donated some money, let me see the board. Let me see a photo about what's going on in the inside, where all the decisions are being made. Because, you know, models are beautiful and it's very pretty, and it's also very temporary. So what was your advice then for businesses now, what they can do? Like, the difference between saying it and doing it, I think that has definitely been a clear point to make. How can they take action, in your opinion?
Well, I think ultimately, you know, I think it does have to depend on the size of the organization.
Yeah.
If you are a sole founder and you're doing everything by hand, you of course, you don't have a board, essentially. It's just you, and you are, you know, that the powerhouse that does everything, which is the truth for a lot of businesses, you know, especially I'm sure like your clients, same with mine, there isn't a board, there isn't even a team, you know, there's one person, maybe maximum two. So I think the way in which those kind of SMEs need to approach it is, you know, what is your, I think, what are your own internal biases, first of all? And then I think, you know, the most public outlet of your brand is your marketing and social media. So what are you doing so that when people actually come on to your pages, do they feel welcome? Do they feel represented? And do they feel that it's a place that can cater for them? Because that is the whole point of marketing. You look for yourself, whether you want to believe it or not, you're looking for people that look like you, to think that this is a safe and inclusive place for me to be in, that I can call my home. So, you know, if you're using influencer marketing, you really want to make sure that it's being sent out to a cross section of different influencers, you know, because your user generated content is such a great way that you can show others that, oh, actually, you know, our products can be, you know, are for everybody. And just because maybe ourselves as the founder are, you know, one race, does not mean that our clothes or our products are. And then I think obviously as companies, you know, grow and they can have teams and you know, hire creators, whether it's freelancers or part-time or full-time members of staff, it is really making sure that there isn't an unconscious bias. You know, I think it's a lot of people that their friendship groups might be, you know, all people from a very similar background. I mean, as people have been saying, if you live in London or if you live in a big city, the thought of that anyway is actually, for me, you know, because London is so mixed. So to not have Black friends or Black colleagues or Black, you know, acquaintances in 2020, you know, it is a bit bizarre in my opinion, but it happens. And I think it's about, you know, if you see a name on a CV that you may not be able to pronounce, does that really matter? You know, are you suggesting that because of that they're not as talented as a somebody Smith? I mean, and I use that example because that is a massive issue. You know, people's names. Well, thank goodness, you know, we're not in you know, some other European countries in which you have to also include a picture on your CV, because there are many statistics and reports that show that those that CVs with essentially non-white faces get rejected, and equally with non-British names are rejected. And I myself did a report on that actually about with French in my degree, which was interesting. But those things are there because we as humans, again, we do like to categorize and stereotype. So I think it's being aware of that and being open-minded with the decisions that you make, and recognizing that, well, essentially, I mean, it sounds so basic, but someone's skin color does not dictate what they can and can't do. Like, I can't really say it any more, excuse the pun, black or white than that. You know, somebody's skin color does not mean anything. So if you are not using those people to work with your brand, to promote your brand, you have to really have a long, hard look in the mirror and think about why that is.
Yeah, great. And then a couple of other things I wrote down. Maybe this is obviously for slightly bigger businesses, but creating like a talent pipeline for people of colour, investing into Black-owned businesses like Glossier have done, actively hiring, retaining and promoting people of colour. Then maybe doing some training with it, like in-house for your team. Another crucial element, using a mix of models, educating yourself on systematic racism, donating to charities in need. And then as a consumer, like questioning brands who look a certain way or like look very one-dimensional. Just have a scroll through their feed before you click through to their bio and go onto their website and think, is this, you know, what are they actually doing? And then if you feel brave enough, like Rhea, calling them out, like when you feel uncomfortable, because you've seen firsthand that it's made a change. So it's not like you're doing it for no reason or to be nasty, like you did it in a super polite way and got a reaction. And so hats off to you. That it's like
I think consumers don't realize the power of their voice, because essentially as a consumer, it's not actually the power of voice, it's the power of the economy. You know, whilst we would love to say that, you know, we live in a democracy and etc., 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 really and truly we live in a money driven society. Fact.
Yeah.
And once you start jeopardizing the potential profit of a company, they will listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether that company is, as we mentioned, you know, a sole founder, tiny scale operation just starting out, or whether you are, you know, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, once you start jeopardizing their profits, they are forced to listen. And I think that obviously, you know, to call out publicly, you know, sometimes works, and I'm testament that it does work. But also email, you know, send an email, send a message. For me now as a journalist, when PRs email me with brands, the first thing I will do is obviously if they're a new brand to me, I will check out their Instagram as the first thing I will do. If they're not diverse, I don't accept the products. Yeah. I will say, like, I'm not going to take it, because where am I there? And I think, you know, that's when you start to realize that actually it's not just a consumer and a producer, it's all the other little bits in between. You know, it is the distributors, it is the PRs, it's this whole system that has this unconscious bias. And I think hopefully now what we're seeing is there will be change. There can't possibly not be change after what we're seeing now.
No way.
In the same way that we can say, you know, COVID-19 will change our lives forever, and the way that we work and the way that we approach people. You know, the murder of George Floyd was really the straw that broke the camel's back. And I don't mean to say, you know, there is no real positive outcome of COVID. However, the fact that this has happened while people are forcibly in their homes and forced to listen, I don't think we as in Black people could have potentially had the opportunity for white people to listen if it weren't for the fact that we were in kind of lockdown quarantine situation.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be a positive, because now we're going to see potentially the 400 years of oppression that have built up and have been brewing as in the undercurrent of every single corporation in the world. We will start to see justice now, and we'll start to see equality. It's not justice, it's equality.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that is a really great sentence to end on. I've got goosebumps. And I know you've got something to write this afternoon, haven't you? So I want to say a massive thank you for your time and your opinions. Yeah. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Probably the best place is probably Instagram, which is so its_Rhea, RHEA, and then you can DM me. My email is there, and that's it. And they can obviously find me via you as well, because we follow each other.